Okay, last week we saw judgment of sin on Achan and his family, which removed the burden from the rest of Israel. Now, if y'all remember, of course you didn't because you weren't here, but a man named Achan stole some stuff from Jericho when they marched around Jericho and it fell down. He stole some stuff. And God held it against them when they went against Ai, the next town they were going to go get. So they had a big dramatic trial where they pointed out who it was. It was Achan and his family, which means trouble. And God told Joshua that he would not let them win another battle until they took care of this sin. So they took care of the sin. They ended up killing him and his family and all of his horses and cattle and donkeys and everything, and buried him under rocks and everything. So then God made up with them after the sin was taken care of, and he was going to allow Israel to be blessed again, be holy, set aside for God. We need to understand that a little leaven leavens the whole lump. And I was just talking about holiness before, and we need to understand that holiness means set aside only for God's use. It doesn't necessarily mean sinless, but it does mean that you're set aside for His use. Now you do His commands. That's part of being set aside for His use, okay? How can we have a holy war, a holy church, or a holy anything as long as sin is winked at and covered up? When we walk in obedience to the Lord, He will bless His people without any work on our part. In other words, if we're God's people, then He is going to bless us without us having to do anything. With disobedience and sin present in our lives, there will be no supernatural help. We need to fight curses and diseases in the world. So why do we need God? Because He's supernatural. If we could do things in the natural, we wouldn't need God. But when we need to call upon a supernatural God, He's not going to be there for us if there's sin and disobedience in our life. The spiritual principle is that sin must be confessed, and then it must be dealt with in order for God's justice to be satisfied. If we have a just God and you have unrepented sin, He's not going to answer your prayers. Once God's justice is satisfied, restoration can happen. It was this same spiritual principle that Jesus did not come to abolish, but to fulfill law on our behalf. In other words, He wasn't going to abolish the law, but He fulfilled it, because He took our sins upon Himself and paid the sin price. But He didn't change any of the laws. It is the use of this ancient spiritual principle that is the only means of our reconciliation with the Father. Since Joshua and Israel have the burden of Achan's sin removed, the Lord will again lead the Israeli army to victory. Again, this is about holiness. It was made holy by God, and Achan tainted their holiness. This mess Achan made had to be ceremonially cleansed before Israel could be set aside for God's use. As an example of this principle, we have to look at Aaron's sons in Leviticus 10. I don't know if y'all ever heard the story of Aaron's sons. They were priests. As Aaron was the high priest, they were made priests also. But they were a little lackadaisical on their obedience. Okay? So if you go to Leviticus 10:1, it says, "Then Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, each took his censer and put fire in it, put incense on it, and offered a strange or profane fire before the Lord, which He had not commanded them." Depending on what translation you have, it's going to say strange or profane fire. Now, why would it be profane or strange? It's because they just took regular coals out of a regular campfire and burnt the incense in it. Okay? So fire went out from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. And Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord spoke, saying, by those who come near me, I must be regarded as holy. And before all the people, I must be glorified." So Aaron held his peace. So God told Moses why He did it, and Aaron was upset, of course, as his sons were just burnt up. But He treated them commonly because they were coming near Him and they weren't holy. So being holy is very important to God. The only way we can be holy is have the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit inside of us. Okay? How can you be set aside as holy for God if you treat Him and His commands as a common thing? They took coals from a common wood fire to burn incense to the Lord. These coals had to come from the brazen altar and had been made holy by sacrificed blood. So the reason you took the coals from the brazen altar is because the altar was holy, and the altar was holy because it had a sacrifice and blood spread on it. God burned up the holy instruments and God's sons who committed the act against Him. Now I wanted to go to Isaiah 6:7 just to read another thing about holiness here. It's up here. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne high and lifted up, and the train of His robe filled the temple. Above it stood a seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one cried to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of His glory. Okay. And the posts of the door were shaken by the voice of him who cried out, and the house was filled with smoke. So I said, Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of the people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King of the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a live coal, which he had taken with the tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth with it and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away, and your sin purged. So that's the most plain, upfront way of showing that he took a coal from the altar of God and touched his lips, and now he was a holy man. But he recognized where he was and who God was and how holy he was, and the angels were saying, Holy, 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 all day, every day, 24 hours a day. And he said, I'm done, because I'm not holy. He said, I'm a man of unclean lips. So they touched his lips with the coals, and now he's a holy man. In order to come close to God, you have to be holy. And the only way you can be holy is Jesus Christ. You have to take on His righteousness. You can't come on your own power. You can't come on your own righteousness, because He'll burn you up. Okay? This was not the only demonstration of holiness of God. In Numbers 16, we see the story of the sons of Korah. Korah was not satisfied that Aaron was chosen in the priesthood, and Korah was tending the tabernacle. Korah was a Levite, but he was chosen to carry and assemble and disassemble the tabernacle. Korah challenged Moses, and so Moses told them to assemble in the morning, and God would choose. The griping men were swallowed up by the earth, and 250 of Korah's men with fire pans in front of the tabernacle were burnt up because they were offering common incense with common fire to a holy God. All the men are the same as far as sin goes, but holy men are set aside for God's use only. These fire pans got too close to the holiness of God and the tabernacle, and therefore would have made them holy without God's permission. So God destroyed them as banned items. There are many sermons that can come from Numbers 16, but the main theme is holiness, and that comes from God, and you can't have it without His approval. Achan touched God's holy property without permission and had to die. So if we went to Numbers 16, I don't know how many have ever heard this story before, but Korah wasn't happy. To be a priest, you had to be a Levite. All priests are Levites. But to be a high priest, you had to be Aaron's DNA. So Korah didn't understand why all he had to do, all of his sons and family members were carrying tent pegs and all the curtains and all that kind of stuff. They had the grunt work of tending to the tabernacle. So he challenged Moses and said, how come you get to pick what's going on? And he said, well, we'll let God pick in the morning. So they all met in front of the tabernacle in the morning to let God decide. Anyway, if you read this, they rose up before Moses with some of the children of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, representatives for the congregation of men of renown. They gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, you take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. So he is saying everybody's holy, so why can't I do it? Okay? Why then do you exalt yourself above the assembly of the Lord? So when Moses heard it, he fell on his face and spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, Tomorrow morning the Lord will show who is his and who is holy, and will cause him to come near to him. That one whom he chooses, he will cause to come near him. Do this, take censers, Korah and all your company, and put fire in them, and put incense in them before the Lord tomorrow. And it shall be that the man who the Lord chooses to be the Holy One, you take too much upon yourselves, you son of Levi. So he's telling them to get 250 censers and fill them with incense and stand before the temple and let's see who God chooses. Then Moses said to Korah, Hear now, you sons of Levi. It's a small thing to you that God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself. Now a priest is a Levite, and the Levites didn't get any land in the inheritance. Their inheritance was to be the priests of God and ministers of God and minister in the tabernacle. So that was their job. So they had quite a special job. I would look at it as a promotion to be Levite, because you're serving God. To do the work of the tabernacle of the Lord, to stand before the congregation and to serve them. Now that he has brought you near to himself, you and all your brethren, the sons of Levi, with you, are you seeking the priesthood also? In other words, you bunch of people want to carry curtains, you want to be a priest also, see? Therefore you and all your company are gathered together against the Lord. And what is Aaron that you complain against him? And Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, but they said, We will not come up. So they see it forming, they see something happening. It is a small thing that you have brought us up out of the land of flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you should keep acting like a prince over us. Moreover, you have not brought us into the land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. In other words, he's saying, y'all going to do something, I'm not coming near you, you know. And he started griping and said, you brought us out here to all die in the wilderness. I don't have any milk and honey land that you promised us, you know. And of course, they're not going to get it until Joshua gives it to them later. Then Moses was very angry and said to the Lord, Do not respect their offering. I have not taken one donkey from them, nor have I hurt one of them. And Moses said to Korah, Tomorrow you and all your company be present before the Lord, you and they, as well as Aaron. Let each take his censer and put incense on it and in it, and each of you bring his censer before the Lord, 250 censers, both you and Aaron, each with his censer. So Aaron's going to be standing out there with his censer. The other 250 are going to be Korah's men. So every man took his censer, put fire in it, laid incense on it, and stood at the door of the tabernacle of meeting with Moses and Aaron. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them at the door of the tabernacle of the meeting. Then the glory of the Lord appeared to all the congregation. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. So the Lord spoke to them and said, y'all get away from them, because I'm fixing to kill them. Then they fell on their faces and said, O God, the God of spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and you be angry with all the congregation? So there it is again, see? So the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the congregation, saying, Get away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. See, but they didn't even want to come up there. They're backing out, but they haven't repented yet. Then Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spoke to the congregation, saying, Depart now from the tents of these wicked men. Touch nothing of theirs, lest you be consumed in all their sins. So they got away from around the tents of Korah, Dathan and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of their tents with their wives, their sons, and their little children. And Moses said, By this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done any of them on my own will. If these men die naturally, like all men, or if they are visited by the common fate of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. So they're going to die a special way. But if the Lord creates a new thing, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up, with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the pit, then you will understand that these men have rejected the Lord. Now it came to pass, as he finished speaking all these words, that the ground split apart under them, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, and with their households and all the men of Korah and their goods. So they and all those with them went down alive into the pit. The earth closed over them, and they perished from among the assembly. Then all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, "Lest the earth swallow us up also." And a fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, to pick up all the censers out of the blaze, for they are holy," and scattered the fire some distance away. So the censers were holy, but the fire was not. Okay? Then the censers of these men who sinned against their own souls, let them be made into hammered plates as a covering for the altar, because they presented them before the Lord. Therefore they are holy, and they shall be a sign to the children of Israel. So Eleazar the priest took the bronze censers which those who were burned up had presented, and they were hammered out as a covering on the altar, to be a memorial to the children of Israel, that no outsider who is not a descendant of Aaron should come near the altar and offer incense before the Lord, that he might not become like Korah and his companions, just as the Lord had said to them through Moses. So you can see here that if you come close to God, you better be holy. And he is the only one that can make you holy. And he is the one that decides if you're to be made holy. So the Holy Spirit came and picked us. He chose us. We didn't choose him. That this whole thing is about holiness. And it shows that we treat holiness kind of commonly. And this is why I try to get it across to people. If you have unrepented sin in your life, you may not get your prayers answered. You may even be disciplined. He says, "I discipline those I love." But if you go around thinking grace, 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 oh, everything's grace and put away, you need to search yourself, like you said at communion, and find out if you're in the faith. And if not, you need to fix that, because supernatural things can only happen if you're holy. He is not going to answer your prayers or do anything until you fix it. And we talk about it in the church. Well, why is our church losing power? It's because we have unrepentant sin. We have people that haven't considered their own lives. There are people that aren't, they don't think like me and you do. They throw their Bible down and wait for next Sunday. They're not.
A lot of them leave it in the seat in front of them.
Exactly. So I don't know how you're supposed to learn anything about God if you don't bring your Bible home. Whatever, and every church has the same problem. You're going to have people, known people that are living together in the church, and no one says a word because they want to keep those two seats filled, you know.
In the offering plate.
In the offering plate, yeah. And who wants to be mean to people? And you're liable to tell them to go jump if they come tell you you're a sinner and you don't want to hear it, you know. But in order to get supernatural things out of the church as a group, you need to get the sin out of the church. Now there's going to be sins that we don't know about, but open sin has to be taken care of. And how can someone teach someone a holy life if they're not allowing holiness to come into the church? In other words, the first thing that would happen is, well, so-and-so is doing it. Why can't I do it? You're picking on me, and he's even a deacon, and you never said a word to him. But the least little thing, you come against me, you know. We're all supposed to be set aside for God's use. Our flesh is supposed to be dead. We're supposed to be an operation for him. And this is what, and I like to keep it out of the church and just keep it on us as families and as fathers, leaders of the spiritual leaders of the house, things like that. You need to take care of the sin that's in your own house, you know, and then bring the holiness to the church, and then bring the holiness to the government. When you vote, it should be holy. You should say, what would God think about this man? And look at the choices we have today. You know, you pick the best one you can, and I believe the holiness will come up. But if you just pick somebody and say, well, I don't care about that, I only care about the economy, or I want to keep abortion, or I want to keep sodomy or something, that's the wrong, you're not thinking, how can you go to church on Sunday after voting for people that are breaking God's laws openly? It's a sin. Romans 1:32 says, knowing that they are deserving of death, they not only do it, but approve of it. So you can't even approve of abortion and sodomy and without sin, because you're taking on the sin of what you approve of. And then you say, well, I don't actually do it. I've never had an abortion myself, but I wouldn't want to keep another woman from having one. Well, where does the baby come in? You know, the innocent blood. So you're just saying, well, I approve of murdering babies, but I'm going to go to church this weekend and worship with the rest of them. Well, somebody needs from the pulpit to say we need to follow God's word as closely as we can. Then grace comes in. What did Paul say? He said, because grace abounds, should sin abound more? Right. Heaven forbid. See, grace is...
In other words, grace ain't a license to sin. Is what
exactly. That's what I'm trying to say is we should try to follow God's commands as closely as we can, and He will see our heart is dedicated to Him, and grace will abound. He'll take care of all kinds of broken commandments if we will just commit our life to Him. And there are, but you'd be surprised the number of people that say, "Well, it won't hurt once. Jesus loves me."
And grace is covered. I can go back and repent.
Yeah, Jesus loves me. They told me that this weekend. Now, you remember how I told you how Joshua is connected to Revelation? Well, here's Revelation 4:8. The four living creatures, each having 6 wings, were full of eyes and around and within, and they did not rest day or night, saying, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." So that's their job every day, all day, 24 hours a day, never ceasing. Just be holy. Be ready to do His work. If God tells you to do something and you don't do it, get ready to pay. Well, anyway, the whole idea in Joshua 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 is holiness. He's trying to teach them something about being holy. And when they came up against Ai, they didn't even ask God. They just decided to send 3,000 men out there, and they got whipped. And they didn't know that they had sin in the camp. And all of Israel lost the battle and were humiliated, and lost 36 men, died, because they had sin in the camp. Not from Achan. Achan didn't die. He died, God killed him, or they killed him, but he didn't die in the battle. It seems to me like, a lot of people have the idea that Achan reached down and touched something and the lightning bolt hit him. No. It's just like if you're out fornicating with a woman or something, the odds are against you getting hit by lightning. But that doesn't mean your life is not going to change in some way negatively. Joshua 8:1. Now the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid." And I underlined that because that's the first thing He says when He's trying to settle you down. "Nor be dismayed. Take all the people of war with you and arise and go to Ai. See, I have given it into your hand, the king of Ai and his people, his city, and his land." So He's telling you it's already done. All you got to do is go take it. He's promising you, don't be afraid. It's done. No more killing on our side. We're good. Okay? Verse 2. "And you shall do to Ai as its king as you did to Jericho and its king. Only its spoil and its cattle you shall take as booty for yourselves. Lay an ambush for the city behind it." Now I underlined lay an ambush because I wanted to show that there's a difference. He's going to handle Ai way different than He handled Jericho. Jericho was just marching around the city and shouting and blowing horns, and the walls fell down. So you would think they're going to go around Ai and do the same thing. No. This is a different battle, different reason, different thinking. So he says, we're going to lay an ambush for Ai. Now, another difference is you can have the booty. So if the first one was first fruits, so God gets it all. It's the tithe. They attacked at least 10 cities, so this was the first city, was Jericho. So he kept everything, including the dead bodies. The bodies were this burnt sacrifice given to his nostrils, and all of the other booty came to the temple, the priests. But now he is saying you can have what you take what you want. But I want all the people killed, because they're going to be a burnt sacrifice to him. Now the king was holy. Now that Israel was holy again, God would be with them to defeat Ai. God again told Joshua that Ai was already given to them. God told Joshua that they should do the same thing with Ai as they did with Jericho. Only Israel could partake of the booty in Ai. Just be sure and kill all the people. God revealed to Joshua that they would ambush Ai this time, not march around and blow trumpets. Just look at the difference now as Joshua knew what God wanted him to do, and the rules this time were totally different than in Jericho. He went to God first. See, when they were defeated, they didn't even go to God and ask him. And if they would ask him, they would have said, well, you got sin in the camp. You need to take care of Achan. But they just went on their own and lost, okay? He went to God first, knew Ai would fall for sure, and knew that the booty he could have. Each battle we fight as a Christian is a different fight with different solutions, and we should seek God's input before we fight each time. Don't take anything for granted, and know that no battle will be exactly as the last one. So each time that we go to God, it should be for each problem we have. Don't believe that what he did for you 6 weeks ago is going to work again this time, okay? Now, God is trying to teach them principles for them to use, and we're going to find out in the next chapter. They don't remember the last chapter. So it happens again. Joshua 8:3. So Joshua arose and all the people of war to go up against Ai, and Joshua chose 30,000 mighty men of valor and sent them away by night. Now, back in those days, they didn't do much by night. So this was a trick. They were going to hide the men behind the city as an ambush. And he commanded them, saying, behold, you shall lie in ambush against the city, behind the city. Do not go very far from the city, but all of you be ready. So he wants them to be behind the city, but be ready. Then I and all the people who are with me will approach the city, and it will come about when they come out against us as the first time, that we shall flee before them. So the first time they came up, they had to flee. So they're going to do it again and make them think that they're going to flee. For they will come out after us until we have drawn them from the city, for they will say they are fleeing before us as the first. Therefore we will flee before them. Then you shall rise from the ambush and seize the city, for the Lord your God will deliver it into your hand. And it will be when you have taken the city that you shall set the city afire. According to the commandment of the Lord you shall do. See, I have commanded you. Verse 9. Joshua therefore sent them out, and they went to lie in ambush and stayed between Bethel and Ai on the west side of Ai. But Joshua lodged that night among the people. Then Joshua rose up early in the morning and mustered the people, and went up, and he and the elders of Israel, before the people of Ai. Verse 11. And all the people of war who were with him went up and drew near, and they came before the city and camped on the north side of Ai. Now a valley lay between them and Ai. So he took about 5,000 men and sent them in ambush between Bethel and Ai on the west side of the city. So now we've got Ai here, and you've got ambush behind him, and you've got another bunch over here to keep the people from Bethel. They didn't want them going to Bethel or coming from Bethel, so they got them cut off over here, and there's a big valley in between the main bunch and Ai. Now it happened when the king of Ai saw it, that the men of the city hurried, rose early, and went out against Israel to battle, and all his people, an appointed place before the plain but he did not know that there was an ambush behind him in the city. So when they saw him, they went out the gates and started chasing them, because they figured they would take him again. And Joshua and all Israel made as if they were beaten before them, and fled by the way of the wilderness. So all the people who were in Ai were called together to pursue them, and they pursued Joshua and were drawn away from the city. There was not a man left in Ai or Bethel who did not go out after Israel. So they left the city open and pursued Israel. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Stretch out your spear that is in your hand towards Ai, for I will give it into your hand." And Joshua stretched out the spear that was in his hand towards the city. So those in ambush arose quickly out of their place. They ran as soon as he had stretched out his hand, and they entered the city and took it, and hurried to set the city on fire. So he's got a spear, and he just pointed it like that, and that was a signal for them to go. Okay? And when the men of Ai looked behind them, they saw, and behold, the smoke of the city ascended into heaven. So they had no power to flee this way or that way, and the people who had fled into the wilderness turned back on the pursuers. So now they've got all of the soldiers out in the middle of nothing, and they turn back and see their home on fire, and all the people are burning, and the ambush came up behind them, so they couldn't go back to Ai even if they wanted to. They couldn't get back to Bethel if they wanted to. There was no place for them to run, so they just slaughtered them right there in the middle. Now when Joshua and all of Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city, and that the smoke of the city ascended, they turned back and struck down the men of Ai. Then the others came out of the city against them, so they were caught in the midst of Israel, some on the side and some on that side. And they struck them down, so that there were none left of them or escape. But the king of Ai they took alive, and brought him to Joshua. And it came to pass, when Israel had made an end of the slaying of all the inhabitants of Ai in the field, in the wilderness where they pursued them, and when they had fallen by the edge of the sword until they were consumed, that all of the Israelites returned to Ai and struck it with the edge of the sword. So they killed the women and children and everybody. They went back and just wiped everybody out. So it was that all who fell that day, both men and women, were 12,000, all the people of Ai. So Joshua rose early and carried out God's ambush plan with 30,000 men. There will be men between Ai and Bethel, and more men behind Ai, put into place in secret at night. This time Joshua will attack the front, and then fall back in retreat again to give the illusion the Jews might not fight once more. When they fall back a good distance, the troops of Ai will follow them out of the city. When they once again fight Ai troops, Joshua will give the signal for the ambush to begin back in Ai. Then they set the city on fire, and the smoke is visible to the Ai troops, but they can't get back to the city because the ambush troops are blocking their way. So Israel killed all the troops fighting outside the city, and then went back to Ai and killed all the women and children left in Ai. This time, however, they could take livestock and gold and silver for booty, as God didn't claim it. The king was captured alive and brought back to Joshua. Ai lost 12,000 that day. Verse 26. For Joshua did not draw back his hand with which he stretched out the spear until he had utterly destroyed all the inhabitants of Ai. Only the livestock and the spoil of that day Israel took for booty for themselves, according to the word of the Lord which he had commanded Joshua. So Joshua burned Ai and made a heap forever, a desolation to this day. And the king of Ai he hanged on a tree until evening, and as soon as the sun was down, Joshua commanded that they should take his corpse down from the tree, cast it at the entrance of the gate of the city, and raise over it a great heap of stones that remains to this day. So when they wanted to give the same treatment to Ai as they did Joshua, so everything had to be destroyed and with stones stacked on top of it. So they took his body and throw it on the other bodies burning, because they burned them all. Then they put stones on top of it. If we remember back when Moses fought the Amalekites at Rephidim, Joshua was his general, and Aaron and Hur helped Moses hold up the rod of God until they won. This is also a time when God declared that the Amalekites would be exterminated or banned. Exodus 17:14. So if you'll remember back when Moses had to fight them when they were headed towards the promised land, they fought at Rephidim, the Amalekites, and he held his hand up so long that he had to have people hold it up for him. Okay?
I thought he held both arms up.
Well, they did, yeah. He had to hold up both arms.
Yeah.
Well, they did the same thing here. He didn't put his spear down until they were all dead. So the spear is his rod. Okay? The rod of God was a symbol of the authority God gave Moses. A king gets a scepter when he takes power. Now in Joshua's case, a spear was his rod of authority to use as God fought his battles for him. I think it's significant that Moses' rod was a shepherd's rod, and Joshua's rod was for a warrior. So the first one was a shepherd, and the second one was a warrior. Okay? Then Jesus comes in as the Lion of Judah. In the last days, he will use an iron rod to show his authority to take the earth as his promised land. Joshua didn't lower his spear until all were dead in Ai. The livestock and the spoil were given to Israel at this time because of the principle of first fruits. God always gets the first of everything. But this was the second city God gave Israel inside the promised land. God claimed the people as a sacrifice, but gave the spoils to the people. If we would start thinking of everything belonging to God already, maybe we would stop trying to misappropriate his property and wait for him to bestow a blessing on you instead of stealing it. That's the whole point of this. Is nobody reads the Old Testament, so they don't know, they don't understand tithing and first fruits and all the laws and regulations that God has set up. But if they did, they would understand that everything belongs to God. He lets you have your salary, so you give a tenth of it back to him. Okay? It's his. He has the whole 100%, but he allows you to have 90%. And he blesses it because you gave his 10% back to him. He returned it to him. He didn't give it to you. He returned it to him. If Achan had just waited a few days, he and his family would still be alive. He wanted it now. He got carried away. If he had just waited a few days, he and his family would have been alive, and God would have given him a blessed amount of booty, whatever it was. I'll bet you had no idea there was so much talk about tithing in Joshua. It's the principle of the first fruits or the firstlings. The king of Ai was hung on a tree as a curse and cut down before the dark to be thrown in a pile of burning bodies and covered with stones, just as the people of Jericho. Now I think I might have made a mistake when I said and cut down, because they didn't hang them with ropes. They put them on a spike. They would get a young tree and sharpen it and put their body down on top of it. That's how they hung people in those days. So I just wrote it down. They cut him down. Well, I would imagine
They probably cut the tree.
Cut the tree down.
The tree down, yeah.
Yeah. As far as crucifixion, that wasn't done until much later. And you could hang by a rope, I guess, but the way they did it back then was they would sharpen a stick and stick you on it. Now the next few verses, there's a little controversy, so we'll have to talk about that when we get there. Verse 30. Now Joshua built an altar to the Lord God of Israel in Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of whole stones over which no man has wielded an iron tool, and they offered it burnt offerings to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. Now the book of the law of Moses is the first 5 books. So this is actually given to them in Deuteronomy. We'll get there in a minute. But he told them to do that as soon as they crossed the Jordan River. Well, they done had 2 battles and they haven't done it yet. And another thing is where they were fighting, happens about 60 miles away. So it's kind of like a weird thing for them to go 60 miles out of the way and then come back. So we don't really know when this was done. And there in the presence of the children of Israel, he wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written. Then all Israel with their elders and officers and judges stood on either side of the ark before the priests of the Levites, who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord, the stranger as well as who was born among them. Half of them were in front of the Mount Gerizim, and half of them was in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses the servant of the Lord had commanded before, that they should bless the people of Israel. So you have two mountains here, and you have a city. Shechem is right between them, and it's almost like an amphitheater, because there's a 3,000-foot mountain here and a 3,000-foot mountain here, and the city is down here. Now on Mount Ebal, that's going to be the one where the curses are read, and they put a altar there, a burnt altar. The other one is the mountain of blessings, and there's no altar there. So God wanted to provide a sacrificial altar for the curses over here. Now they both took turns reading them off these mountains so the people could hear down in Shechem. I don't think he put the whole law. I don't think he put just the 10 Commandments. So the blessings and the cursings were what was written. So I would say the Deuteronomy blessings and cursings was what he whitewashed the rocks and wrote them all down there. So it was quite the reading. There was a lot of writing and reading going on. Okay, verse 34. And afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessings and the cursings, according to all that is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of it that Moses had commanded which Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, with the women and the little ones and the strangers who were living among them. So he's telling you there's strangers living among them, and they're getting the law for the first time. I don't even know if they're allowed to go in the tabernacle, so they have to be taught outside the tabernacle. And the controversy is the rabbis say, well, it's all the whole law of Moses, which would mean 5 books. That's a lot of scribbling, okay, a lot of reading. Then there's the 10 Commandments. It could be just that, okay. But then it talks about reading the curses and the blessings. So I kind of lean towards that as a medium amount of writing on the rocks and stuff. They would have to be pretty huge rocks to get all of the law of Moses. So I think that we're covered on that. In fact, I really think we're covered on the 10 Commandments, because Jesus said, love the Lord with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, and you've covered the law. So he has basically said, you can cover all those, don't build images and don't worship idols and all this kind of stuff. Love the Lord with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Covers those. And then loving your neighbor has to do with all the rest of them. So he's got it down into one. I don't have a problem with the 10 Commandments being the 10 Commandments, because it's more specific.
Right.
But if you get right down to it, love the Lord with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. You'll go to heaven. But see,
also if you do that, you're not going to break the other commandments.
right. Well, that's the idea. Is, I mean, they talk about don't move a boundary line over or something like that. Well, if you love the Lord, you wouldn't do that. I don't think. But which laws are you going to pick and choose that I'm going to follow, and which laws are you going to say I'm not? So he also says in Leviticus 23 to keep all the feast days. Well, not a one of us go to the Passover, Well, I take communion. Okay. But what about the others?
Going to be judged by our feast festival days. Right,
exactly. That's the point I'm trying to make, is that keep the 10 Commandments and you'll be good. It'll be good for you. You can have arguments all day long. It's one of those deals like Genesis. There's just certain things that people are never going to agree with you about. And I believe that keeping the law is the 10 Commandments. And if you love the Lord with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, you're not going to break the laws, And there's other people that say, well, you have to be circumcised. Well, in Acts 15 or so, maybe 15 or 17, it talks about they had a council of Jerusalem, or council of Judah, and they decided that the Gentiles didn't have to be circumcised, and along with a bunch of other stuff.
Who was it, Jesus or Paul once said that there was a lot of them that was circumcised and wasn't even saved.
Well, that's Paul's teaching in Romans. It talks about what good is it to be circumcised if you're not going to follow the law.
Right.
But if you've got an uncircumcised man that follows the law, then hey, he's circumcised. His heart is circumcised.
Right.
So, as Gentile believers in Jesus Christ, we look at the spiritual side of things. They look at physical outward signs like, well, I can't eat that. Well, yeah, you can, you just won't, you know. And
They still always try to base things on works.
right, yeah, exactly. So I'm a little leery about teaching people that you're not under the law, because I believe that the 10 Commandments are laws that you should keep.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I could go out and kill somebody and expect to go to
I've
hell.
always thought that we wasn't under the law, because if we did what God said and, you know, love God with all our heart and brother and all that, we wouldn't be breaking those things. We don't look at that, well, I'm not gonna kill somebody because that's against the law. We say we're not gonna kill somebody because that's not what God wants us to do.
Right, yeah.
That's the difference.
But see, I believe in self-defense. So
Well, yeah, I'm talking about.
that's why it's very important to read the 10 Commandments just right. You read them as don't shed innocent blood.
Innocent, but yeah,
You
I
know.
don't believe all of our war heroes went to hell.
Exactly. And look at the killing going on here.
Right.
They killed 12,000 in one day here. So,
And then have a party to
They weren't
celebrate.
innocent.
Yeah.
They weren't innocent.
right, God gave them permission to kill them, so they killed them, you know, and
Right.
that's what a lot of Christians don't like, is they'll read about, well, he's a genocidal maniac. He killed everybody that he could. And I'm like, well, they're banned people. They're not holy. And this is what he's trying to say. I don't want you to learn anything. These people have nothing good for you. You're my treasured people, and I want you to have the land to yourself. And these people, if you let them live, they're going to give you trouble from now on, which they're doing today. Well, Old Testament or New Testament, there's always been wars. And like he said, I don't believe that our soldiers are going to hell because they killed somebody. But you have people that won't even step on a cockroach because it says do not kill.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, that's not shedding innocent blood. It shouldn't have been born a cockroach, is all I can tell you. They all need to die.
Yeah.
Well, I'll start this set of verses with the problems and doubts involved in their placement here in time. Now, I wanted to explain this. This was the next verse, but I'm not sure this is when it happened. I believe it happened, but I don't know when it happened. Jericho and Ai are about 60 miles from these mountains. This all started back in Deuteronomy 27 through 30, when Moses prophesied that they would write these laws on the altar on Mount Ebal as soon as they crossed the Jordan. Most rabbis agree that they couldn't have physically, or would not have, walked 60 miles after the Battle of Ai to perform this ceremony, then walk back to Gilgal. And I don't know when this happened, but I know it happened. Another problem might have been passing that far in that direction would have taken them close to the Gibeonites that will appear in chapter 9. And they will trick Joshua into thinking they lived very far away while living just a few miles from where Israel was camped. Now next week we're going to talk about the Gibeonites, who are going to decide to go make a peace treaty with Israel, and they get fooled. Well, if you look on the map, if you look where these two mountains are in Shechem, it's way up north. They had to walk through the Gibeonites to get there. So why wouldn't Israel know that, well, no, these are Gibeonites and we need to kill them? You know, we'll get into that next week. But they would have shown themselves to the Israel, and the Gibeonites would have been known that there's 4 or 5 cities there right in a row, and you would have had to walk through that to get to these two mountains and then walk back. And they're supposed to kill every person in all of these cities. So it looks to me like that they would have just brought the war up there eventually. Now, also, when they crossed over the Jordan when it was dry, they didn't walk all the way up to the northern part of the West Bank and do this. Like, that's what they were told to do. And we can go there if you want to look at it. It's in Deuteronomy 7 and Deuteronomy 27, I think, or something like that. Now, Moses told them, as soon as you cross into the land that the Lord gives you, is to do this. Go to Mount Ebal, build an altar, and write this down.
I remember that.
So it's there. I just don't think it happened right after the Battle of Ai. maybe it did, you know, but there's a lot of trouble with the rabbis. They were all arguing. They got their maps out and they're like, I don't know, 3 million people going up that way.
I've seen a lot of stuff that wasn't in chronological order.
Right. So I just wanted to kind of let you know that, in fact, I'll tell you here, my job as a Bible teacher is to teach the Bible. I'm not an archaeologist or a historian. Knowing the time this trip happened is not as important as knowing that Joshua did as he was ordered by God and Moses in Deuteronomy 11:29 and Deuteronomy 27:5. So if you go to Deuteronomy 11:29, that's the first time he says you will do this when you cross over the Jordan. Okay. First of all, Ebal and Gerizim were mountains about 3,000 feet high, with the town of Shechem in the middle. They constructed the altar on Mount Ebal and wrote the whole law on whitewashed stones. They even made it white so you could see it. I guess it's a lot of little writing. There is a controversy here also, whether the 10 Commandments or the whole book of Deuteronomy was written on the rocks. I fall on the side of Deuteronomy 27 through 30 being what was written. Joshua was told to read the blessings of God from Mount Gerizim and the curses from Mount Ebal. God wanted the altar built on the mountain that had the curses on it for a remedy to be available. The tribes were divided 6 on one side and 6 to read from each mountain, which acted as an amphitheater so everyone could hear. An altar is used to kill a sacrifice, but if you look at it from God's view, an altar preserves life. Killing an innocent animal on the altar saves the lives of sinful men. Bronze and iron are generally used for killing in war, so God didn't want any iron tools to be used on the altar stones. In the last days, swords and spears will be beaten into plowshares and pruning hooks also. To learn more about this happening, please go back on your own and carefully read Deuteronomy 27 through 30 to learn the blessings and the cursings God was holding his people to obey, especially Deuteronomy 30, 15 through 20. I just like to implore y'all that if you get some spare time for Bible reading, it only takes 20 minutes or so to read a couple of chapters. Deuteronomy 30, 19. I just picked these two out to read them because I like them. I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live, that you may love the Lord your God, that you may obey his voice, that you may cling to him. He is your life and the length of your days, and that you may dwell in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give them. I love that he puts his life and death before you, and then he has to tell you, choose life. That's how stupid you are.
That's like this.
But I like also that you love the Lord your God, that you may obey his voice, that you may cling to him. He is your life and the length of your days. And he also promises life to your family too. Your descendants may live. If you read Deuteronomy 27 through 30, you will get the detail of what these verses in Joshua is speaking about, no matter what time it occurred. Next week, we'll see an entirely different subject discussed in chapter 9, when Gibeonites make a peace treaty with Israel and the dilemma that it causes. The black and white rules God gives his people become gray and confusing to Israel due to them not following God's command exactly. And then I put again. Joshua chapter 7 and 8 play a key role in defining the identity of the people of God. Here the people of God return to the reality of life after all the festivity of their miraculous victory at Jericho, learning now to deal with defeat at Ai. They learn that even God's treasured people face the anger of God when they act in self-confidence. I wanted to get this across because if you live a supernatural life, it's all good. But when we're down and out, we go to God first. Every time you fall to your knees and beg God to help you. But instead of everything being peachy keen, sometimes we have failures in our life, and we have to go to God first. So this is teaching you how to be God's treasured people, whether you get blessed or cursed, okay? They learn that even God's treasured people face the anger of God when they act in self-confidence, refusing to look to God for direction or giving Him glory for their victories. How would you like to have a victory in your life and you didn't say anything to God? You didn't thank Him or anything. The lesson learned by the fathers, the patriarchs, had no effect on the sons of the promised land. They had to learn those lessons all over again, just as we must learn them today. So if you'll remember, the people that came out of Egypt saw miracles. Every day they had miracles, striking rocks to get water, manna every morning and everything.
That cloud that hung over them.
Yeah. Well, they all died in the wilderness. These are the children of those people. They hadn't witnessed all the things that their mom and dad had. Okay? So now they're having to see it again and learn it on their own. Just as we have to learn it on our own. The people of God will not always travel with joy after crossing through the Jordan on a supernaturally dried ground and marching around a doomed Jericho that stood no chance against them. Often God's people find themselves in utter defeat, falling before the Father with pleas for mercy and renewal. They learned what it meant to be a covenant people of God. It meant adopting the divinely ordered lifestyle. It meant making each decision of life in the light of the divine leadership, not in the darkness of personal self-confidence or man-made rules. If we don't learn nothing else by this, go to God first on everything. Whether it's buying a car, whether it's getting married, whether it's buying a TV even. Just ask God if you're ready to have a TV. He chose to punish His people to teach them the meaning of keeping covenant, as well as bless them when they kept their covenants. Jesus came to pay our debts for us, but we are still His covenant people, expected to follow His commands. Covenant life is demanding as it is rewarding. We should learn as much from defeat as the blessed times. I think most people learn from defeat more than they do the blessed times. Next week, chapter 9, and the covenant with the enemy.